Welcome to Discipline Training for all staff in Lubbock ISD for the 2018-2019 school year. Our goal is for our school and student discipline to ensure that our policies and procedures help us create environments that are safe, civil, and productive. When teachers and students affirm that those things are present, we know that it will result in better learning environments for all. We also recognize that one essential element in the creation of those environments is equity, ensuring that all students receive what they need to be successful behaviorally and academically. All staff members annually review the Student Code of Conduct via online compliance courses. The Code of Conduct and District Discipline Management Plan can both be accessed via the Student and School Support Department webpage. Included in these documents are LISD policies, procedures, and best practices regarding student discipline. Lubbock ISD utilizes the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, or PBIS framework, to guide our approach to classroom management and student behavior. In PBIS, there are 3 tiers of interventions and supports. At Tier 1, the focus is on teaching appropriate behavior and preventing misbehavior. With strong Tier 1 systems in the school-wide setting, adults have a common set of expectations and language for behavior because of the use of guidelines for success, common area expectations, systems for reinforcing appropriate behavior, skill building, and consistent responses to inappropriate behavior. All of those systems are explicitly taught to all students to help them gain that common understanding. When Tier 1 is implemented with fidelity, 75 to 85% of students will regularly exhibit appropriate behavior. The key to maintaining high-functioning PBIS systems is adult consistency. When we all use the same language and have the same expectations for student behavior, it creates a school climate in which students know what is expected of them in various settings and also what to expect from adults. Your campus PBIS team will provide materials and a schedule for teaching these Tier 1 school-wide expectations to all students in the first weeks of school. We know that our Tier 1 systems are all about teaching expectations, reinforcing positive behavior, tangibly or intangibly, and responding consistently to negative behavior. When our Tier 1 systems are appropriate for our student population and consistently implemented, they should meet the behavioral needs of 75 to 85% of students. Remember, PBIS does not stop at Tier 1. We still have 15 to 25% of kids who need some additional support to be successful. Tier 2 systems focus on a smaller group of at-risk students. We have a problem-solving meeting and identify interventions and supports that will help the student be successful. We might do some targeted social skill instruction, and we're really going to focus on implementing a check-in, check-out system. Tier 2 should meet the needs of an additional 12 to 15% of students. At the top of the pyramid, we have Tier 3. The supports at this level will become very specialized. We conduct a functional behavior assessment, and then we develop a behavior intervention plan for that specific student. Often, we'll refer the family to outside counseling or other services in the community. Only about 2 to 5% of students will need this level of support. The LISD Behavioral Response to Intervention Flowchart details how students move through the multi-tiered systems of support for behavior. All teachers implement Tier 1 supports in all settings in the school in order to teach, model, and allow for practice of expected behaviors. Generally speaking, we implement Tier 1 supports for about 6 weeks before determining a student is in need of additional support. During that time, teachers utilize a variety of effective behavior strategies like positive reinforcement of expected behavior and logical consequences for inappropriate behavior to help all students be successful. Students who are in need of additional supports or interventions at Tier 2 are identified in one of 2 ways. First, When a teacher recognizes that students are struggling with behavior, they should initiate a referral to the campus PBIS team for a problem-solving meeting. In addition to those teacher referrals, the PBIS team reviews data every grading period to identify students needing Tier 2 intervention. The team meets with impacted staff members, parents, and, when appropriate, the student of concern to conduct a problem-solving meeting and develop a plan for intervention. That plan focuses on identifying patterns of behavior and functions, preventing inappropriate behavior, teaching undeveloped skills, and identifying effective responses to both appropriate and inappropriate behavior. The plan is implemented for about 6 to 8 weeks. The team monitors the student's progress every 2 weeks and adjusts the plan as needed. If a student continues to have behavioral difficulties despite a Tier 2 intervention plan, then the PBIS team determines if a referral to the Student Support Team, or SST, would be appropriate. At this level, the team may decide to conduct a functional behavior assessment and develop a specific behavior intervention plan. It may also be appropriate to refer the student to wraparound or community services. While much of the work at Tier 1 PBIS focuses on school-wide systems, we also know that each teacher's classroom expectations and behavior management practices greatly influence student success. The key elements of effective classroom management are included in the pieces of the acronym STOIC. Structuring the classroom. Teachers develop and design systems, routines, and efficient procedures for everyday experiences in the classroom. Teaching expectations. Once those structures have been determined by the teacher, they then teach them explicitly to students and provide opportunities for practice. Observing student behavior. Teachers consistently monitor throughout the school day for on-task student behavior. Interacting positively. Teachers work to build relationships with students and are intentional about acknowledging students who are behaving appropriately. And finally, correcting fluently. When misbehavior occurs, teachers make sure that their corrections are brief, calm, and consistent. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into each of those pieces of STOIC. Structure in the classroom. How efficient and consistent are the procedures for the beginning and ending of class? Do they limit student movement? How do the daily schedule and chunking of activities support student engagement? How do student roles or classroom jobs help make routines more efficient? What systems exist for dealing with missing work and absences? When students work with partners or groups, how are the activities structured in a way that promotes on-task behavior? Please pause the video and discuss with the people at your table. How effective is your plan for structure in the classroom? Teaching expectations. How and when were students initially taught the expectations for all classroom activities? When have I planned to reteach classroom expectations? For example, after extended breaks of 3 or more days and at key times of the year. When was the last time expectations were reviewed with students? How often is CHAMPS used before classroom activities? How often do students have an opportunity for perfect practice of classroom expectations? Please pause the video and discuss with the people at your table. How effectively do you teach student expectations? Observing behavior. How do I plan to intentionally monitor students in an ongoing fashion? What techniques do I use to let students know I'm monitoring, either verbal or nonverbal? Do I position my body at all times so that I'm able to see the vast majority, if not all, students? When visiting with an individual or group of students, how do I ensure that the rest of the class is still monitored for on-task behavior? That is, how do I avoid getting sucked into conversations with one student that lead me to not pay attention to the rest of the class? Please pause the video and discuss with the people at your table. How effective is your observation of student behavior in the classroom? Interacting positively. What system is in place for acknowledging positive student behavior on a daily basis? How do I ensure that all students get reinforcement for positive choices regularly? How often is positive contact made with parents of all students? What ongoing methods are used to develop and maintain positive relationships with students? How has a classroom culture of respect been developed? How are students developing motivation, either through extrinsic or intrinsic means? How are fun and enthusiasm incorporated into daily instruction? Please pause the video and discuss with the people at your table how well do you build relationships and reinforce positive behavior in the classroom. Correcting fluently. What is the plan for responding to common classroom misbehavior? How consistently is the response to misbehavior calm, brief, instructive, that is telling students what to do rather than what not to do, immediate, and, as much as possible, private? How do I ensure that I do not engage in power struggles with students? How do I help myself stay calm during stressful or tense interactions with students? What systems are in place to help instruction keep going while effectively addressing student misbehavior? Please pause the video and discuss with the people at your table. How effective are your corrections of misbehavior in the classroom? When misbehavior occurs in our classrooms, it is important to ensure accurate reporting. Our district utilizes Review 360 for this process. So that there is consistency in our approach to misbehavior, PBIS teams discuss and often define which behaviors should be managed by teachers in the classroom and which behaviors should always be sent to an administrator in the office. If you are unclear about this issue, please visit with one of your campus administrators. In Review 360, incidents can be documented 3 ways: positive behavior incidents, in-class incidents, or office referrals. Positive behavior incidents can be a great way to communicate with parents regarding good choices students make. The in-class incident form should be used for patterns of inappropriate low-level misbehavior. Office referrals should be utilized for behaviors such as safety transgressions, prohibited items, and other incidents that necessitate the intervention of an administrator. When documenting the incidents, remember to give detailed explanations of the incident that include a clear description of what the behavior looked and sounded like. All information entered into Review 360 is considered an official school record and should be documented in a way that only includes the name of the individual student. At times, situations with students may become escalated. It is paramount that we as the professional educators in those situations maintain a position of self-control. In many cases, our response to the student influences whether the situation continues to escalate or is able to be diffused. Students will tend to mirror our own energy and body language. When dealing with an escalated student, be sure to use a calm tone of voice and a neutral physical stance by keeping your arms by your side and staying out of the student's physical space. If there are logical, safe choices that can be offered to the student, that can help them feel as though they have some control in the situation. It's also helpful to provide students with time or space for calming down before beginning to discuss behavioral choices. Whenever possible, have the conversation with an escalated student in a private manner. Removing the audience of peers will help the student not feel the need to save face. Finally, simply asking, "How can I help?" to an upset student may diffuse the tension of a situation and help them become more willing to respond appropriately to you. Pause the video and discuss with the people at your table. What are ways you effectively help de-escalate tense situations with students? Let's take a deeper look at the Tier 2 process in LISD. Remember, when Tier 1 systems are implemented with fidelity, about 12 to 15% of our students will need additional help at Tier 2. The Tier 2 process in LISD allows for early identification and intervention for at-risk students. Two intervention approaches we are focusing on at Tier 2 are check-in, check-out, and intentional small group skill building for students. PBIS teams receive training during the summer in these Tier 2 strategies. PBIS teams have also been provided with resources to help with skill building on campus. Counselors and staff from communities and schools are also invaluable resources in the skill building process. Resources, forms, and flowcharts can all be found on the district PBIS webpage. The final portion of this video will focus on understanding and reflecting on disproportionality in discipline. All disproportionality violations are related to Title IV or Title VI. There are two main pathways to disproportionality violations. Different treatment is when a campus assigns different consequences for the same behavior to students based on their racial or ethnic background. For example, both the green and purple student blurt about the same amount. However, when the green student blurts, they are assigned detention. When the purple student blurts, they are assigned out-of-school suspension. Disparate impact is when a campus has a policy with consistent consequences for a behavior, but that policy impacts one ethnic group more strongly than others. For example, both green and purple students receive out-of-school suspension for blurting, but the students who are purple blurt more often than the students who are green. Now, let's look at some real-world examples from the Office for Civil Rights. The first investigation took place in a high school that, according to their district code of conduct, had a policy of a one-day suspension for any student who acted in a threatening manner. The behaviors that could be included in that were congregating in the hall, talking too loudly, talking back to administrators. African American students on this campus were more likely to be defined as acting in a threatening manner and therefore suspended. White students who engaged in similar behaviors were more likely to be labeled as having no hall pass or being a classroom disruption, and therefore were assigned after-school detention. The Office for Civil Rights found that the policy reflected different treatment for students based on their racial or ethnic background. The remedies suggested by the Office for Civil Rights were that the campus better define what acting in a threatening manner truly looks and sounds like to remove subjectivity. They also asked administrators to determine the behavior before determining a consequence. They requested additional training on the implementation of policies for administrators and teachers, and they required that there be training for classroom management techniques and culturally responsive teaching for teachers. Our second example comes from a middle school that had a zero-tolerance tardy policy. If students arrived more than 5 minutes late to class, they spent the remainder of the period in the principal's office. If they had more than 5 tardies in a semester, they received a one-day suspension. Asian American students at this campus were disproportionately impacted and losing class time. As the department investigated, they discovered that Asian American students were more likely to live farther away from the school, and an interstate prevented them from walking to school. The first available bus of the day that brought most of these students to school regularly arrived after school had begun, thus resulting in a loss of instructional time for these students more often than their peers of other ethnic backgrounds. The department found that there was disparate impact in this case. The remedies they suggested were an adjustment of the policy to find alternatives to suspension that would adequately address the behavior of tardiness. And they required the campus to provide opportunities for students to make up lost instructional time as a result of that policy. Because we know that one of our main goals when dealing with behavior is to minimize the loss of instructional time for all students, we work to find responses to misbehavior that correct it while keeping the student in the classroom as much as possible. We also know that responses like suspension or placement at DAP frequently do not have a long-term impact on changing student behavior. Logical consequences help the student better learn from the discipline incident. One example of a logical consequence is that if a student wrote graffiti in a classroom, the student would then help clean the classroom outside of instructional time. With a partner, look at the list of behaviors on the screen and generate logical consequences that are something other than in or out of school suspension. Please pause the video at this time. Now that we've looked at a couple of real-world examples, let's talk about how the Office for Civil Rights determines disproportionality is in place. In order to calculate the rate of disproportionality, the Office for Civil Rights compares the ethnic breakdown of a district or campus's population with the rates of assignment for the consequences of in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and placement at DAP. In our district, that's ACEs for elementary or Priority Intervention Academy for secondary students. Let's say a campus assigned ISS 15 times. In 5 of those incidents, the students were African Americans. 33% of assignments of ISS went to African American students. African American students account for 17% of the campus population. The percent of assignments of ISS is nearly double the overall percent of population for African American students. So this campus does have a disproportionality issue in their data regarding ISS and African American students. Now let's look at the district report for disproportionality from Review 360 for the 2017-2018 school year. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see the overall ethnic breakdown for our population in LISD. Currently, African American students account for about 13% of our population. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see the level of disproportionality for the consequences of in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and placement at DAP. This chart is broken down by ethnic group and by consequence. If the bars are closer to 0, then that means students are equally likely as their peers to receive the particular consequence. If the bars are above 0, that's the percentage more likely than their peers that they are to receive a consequence. And if it is below 0, that's the percentage less likely than their peers to receive the consequence. As you can see, in LISD, our African American students are more likely to receive the consequences of ISS, OSS, and DAP as a whole. Each campus has its own disproportionality report that can be shared by administrators. The last step of today's process is for you to look at your own discipline data from the 2017-2018 school year. If you were employed by LASD last year and entered information into Review 360, then you should follow the steps at the link on the screen that says OCR Teacher Report Steps. You'll view your own data and then complete a Google reflection form. The results of this reflection form will be submitted to the Office for Civil Rights for review and comment. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you all have a wonderful school year with students